Okay, sailors, this is going to be an interesting video for a lot of reasons. Number one is that I'm coming to you right now from the historic South Carolina town of Georgetown, third oldest town in South Carolina. And I'm trying to do this video to bring you up to date on what this trip is all about. And I want to show you, as I open up, this beautiful view, if you can see it. This is looking down Winyah Bay that brings you up into Georgetown from lower South Carolina, specifically where I came from a few days ago, McClellanville, and before that just Charleston, leaving Charleston on Sunday, arriving Georgetown on Monday. And from here it's Myrtle Beach and then into North Carolina. But first, as I promised, I want to tell you what the trip is all about. And as I do, I'm going to walk back to the Voyage a little bit to show you the marina here. It's lovely. Quaint, small, easy access to everything, immaculate. It's called Harbor Walk Marina, and right in the center of the historic district of Georgetown. And if you're ever in this area, I highly recommend seeing it, at least for a short stop. So here we go, and let me tell you about this trip from South Florida to Cape May, New Jersey on a 41-year-old mini sloop, or mini yacht actually, a Cape Dory 22D that I purchased and had built for me to some specifics back in 1983 when I was living and working in New York on Wall Street. Bought it in Huntington, New York in the spring of 1983. Actually, I ordered it in Huntington, New York from a dealer. And this little baby is a little special because this little yacht is only one of 30 in the world, and I'll tell you why. Cape Dory built 176 Cape Dory 22s. They only built 30 with a diesel engine in it. And that changed the game for me as a sailor, because it allowed me to go places I never would have been able to had the boat been equipped with just an outboard. That little engine, the MR1GM one-cylinder engine, the 13-gallon fuel tank, had 440 miles of steaming range on 13 gallons of fuel. And that is just steaming, not sailing. So I could go just about anywhere on 13 gallons of fuel in that little boat, and I did. In the next 10 to 11 years, I sailed the boat up and down the coast from Nantucket to Maryland, and in the fall of 1983, I sailed the boat to Florida, where I relocated and resumed my career in Palm Beach. But that trip was pretty special because the Voyage did an epic voyage, not just to South Florida, but also into the Bahamas, specifically Eleuthera. And there was a reason for that. I was searching for and found an old friend of the family's, a lovely native woman by the name of Dorothy Knowles, who lived in the quaint little dirt road town of Tarpon Bay, Eleuthera, in southern Eleuthera, who I'd first met when I was 10 years old, once on a vacation with my family, who became very close to Dorothy and her family, and thus began our special attachment to Eleuthera. And in fact, it began even before that, because the reason why we went to Eleuthera is because my parents had read this epic novel called Winds from the Carolinas. And Winds from the Carolinas was written in 1959 by an author named Robert Wilder. And it's a very cool story. And the story takes place, setting is the early 1770s, as the colonies were banding together to form the new republic. There was some dissenters in the New World, and they were called Loyalists. And these Loyalists, forgive me for a minute, I'm entering a code to a gate. These Loyalists decided that they were going to be, in fact, very loyal to the King of England, and they were not going to join in or participate in any way in becoming the first Americans. So, these wealthy landowners, plantation owners, made the incredible decision, which they probably thought was pretty smart at the time, to relocate. And I mean relocate. As the book details, they dismantled, and it's all based on historical fact, by the way, even though it's a novel. The book details how the southern plantation owners from the Carolinas, and mostly South Carolina specifically, decided to dismantle their plantation homes and estates, literally brick by brick, and take them to an English-owned colony by the name of the Bahama Islands, or the Bahamas. And they chose a specific island, and it happened to be Eleuthera. And this epic novel is what led my parents to Eleuthera, to meet the lovely Dorothy Knowles and her family. And that we did. Kept in touch with Dorothy for many years, until my mother died in 1983. And then we kind of lost contact with her, my father and I. In any case, I am writing a book called Soul Sail to Eleuthera, which details this, and it details the epic voyage of the Vente Te in 1993, 94, end of 93, beginning of 94, to Eleuthera, 25 years after I met her, to find the infamous Dorothy Knowles in Tarpon Bay. And that we did. We found her, we visited with her, we laughed, we cried, and we departed. I sailed back to Florida shortly thereafter, arriving February 4th of 1994, and 3 weeks later I was back in my career in an office wearing a suit, and kind of in a surreal position of, for a few months anyway, still living on the Vente Te while I did that. Interestingly enough, the first day on the job I met a woman who later became my wife. Not much later, a year later. A year after that, we had 2 kids at once, boy-girl twins. And sadly enough, within 3 years of that, we were divorced. And it was, as many things in my life are, epic. The divorce was so intense that it garnered world news attention as a result of my wife committing international child abduction, taking the kids back to her homeland in Denmark. Tried to resolve the problem for 9 months, almost a year, to no avail, knowing the whole time that it was in the best interest of the children to be in touch regularly with both of their parents. So then I decided to fight. 2.5 years later, and $160,000 or more. At that time was a lot of money, and it still is, but working 3 jobs, one in my career, a weekend job, and eventually starting a side business which increased my income dramatically. I was able to fly back and forth to Europe about 5 times a year over 2.5 years to do everything I could in the way of meeting with my ex-wife, visiting the children, and hiring attorneys to fight her action and criminality, in fact. Because she probably didn't even know at the time, but just 3 years earlier, the U.S. Congress implemented a law called the International Parental Kidnapping Crime Act of 1993. That and a Hague Convention treaty signed by 53 countries, including the U.S. and Denmark, and lots and lots and lots of drama in between, spanning numerous countries from Denmark to South Africa and eventually southern England. Through all of this, I gained custody of the children in 3 separate countries: the US, Denmark, and the United Kingdom. It was so dramatic that it led to an invitation to testify about it from the United States Congress, and in fact the Senate, which I did testify before in October of 1999. So here's where we go from here. The kids came back to America through those efforts, and I began raising them at the age of 3 years old, singly, with about 0 help, which was fine. I had a good career, and I was able to afford just about whatever we needed and wanted. It was hard, very hard. So hard, in fact, that I had to give up my beloved Voyage when it all started, keeping my expenses as low as possible to afford their eventual repatriation. So fast forward from there a little bit, and we're now in the late 90s, and I am missing a dream that I dreamed for years while sailing offshore back and forth to Nantucket and other places. And that dream was having my children, which I didn't even know I would have someday, but hoped to have, sitting next to me on the tiller while I watched them. The tiller of the Voyage, that is. The Voyage also helped me grieve my mother as I sailed solo hundreds of miles at sea, back and forth to different places. And it fueled some dreams, one of which was going to Florida and making God's plan of getting married and having these beautiful kids all come together like I could never imagine. Once we started into normal life together as a family of three, had a busy career that was not a 9-to-5 job. It was a full-time job, meaning lots of nights, lots of extra effort, travel, etc. But we did very well, except there was one thing missing, besides her mother, that is, and that was Devante Tay. So I started searching for her shortly after the kids came back. And I would get up every morning, an hour before I would have my breakfast, and I would search online while I'm drinking a cup of coffee. I'd search online for Devante Tay, hoping that somebody had her somewhere and was tired of her and putting her up for sale. Quite a hope. Quite a dream. But I made it happen. It only took me 15 years. And in 2011, that special little boat helped me grieve the death of someone else very special to me, my best friend Charles Baxter, who had just died the week before I repurchased her of cancer at the age of 50. So in February of 2011, I took my son down and gave him the title to the boat that I had just bought for him and us. And together we sailed it from Miami, where we found it rotting in a canal and essentially destroyed, almost, but still floating. But it was enough that we were able to motor her and bring back from storage most of the equipment that I needed, including sails, to sail her from Miami back to West Palm Beach with my son. And that was a very special sail itself with Luke. We had an epic sail from Miami to Boca Raton and then on to West Palm Beach. Actually, we motored up the intercoastal from Miami to Boca Lighthouse Point. And when we left the next morning, we sailed from Boca to West Palm and had the sailors' best fortune of soon after leaving the beautiful Boca Raton Lighthouse Point Inlet. And it has a beautiful lighthouse. We were greeted by a pod of dolphins in 15 feet of crystal clear water, almost leading the way back to West Palm, which on a southwesterly and a winter day was just an amazing sail. It was just not long enough. Just hours later, we were in West Palm and entering the inlet at Singer Island. And from there, the boat has basically just rested in a state of ill health and decline, and that disturbed me for 13 years. Finally got to the point, and circumstances came aligned, that I decided to give up on the hopes of doing any type of restoration on her in South Florida, and I decided to take her, stripped of everything, including the diesel, back to New Jersey on her own hull. Sadly, with no diesel, we're confined to a small outboard now, an 8 horsepower outboard that we're putt-putting up the intercoastal 1,200 miles from Jupiter to Cape May, New Jersey. So yes, this video channel is called Sailing Devante Tay 40 Years. But I don't want anybody to think that I have been sailing her for 40 years. So thus this video, because as I said, there was 15 years in there that I didn't even own her. And for the past 13 years, really haven't been able to sail her due to the condition of her. But slowly I've been purchasing items such as new standing rigging, etc. And for the past 2 years, I did a lot of work on her hull as I careened her in Jupiter, redoing the bottom first and some other repairs, etc. Enough to get her ready for this trip. So we left Jupiter on the 24th of May, just steamed up to Port Salerno, just south of Stewart. Quaint little lovely fishing town. Hung out there for the Memorial Day weekend because of the danger of traveling up the intercoastal with an 8 horsepower outboard pushing a 2-ton vessel in the middle of Memorial Day weekend traffic. It was just not a good idea. But I wanted to get away from Jupiter and get the voyage started as soon as I could, so I left anyway. And I just hung out on the boat up there for 3 days and left Tuesday morning. From there it was Vero, O'Galley, Titusville. Watched the space launch. You can see that on an earlier video. And just left Charleston on Sunday. Did an overnighter in McClellanville on anchor. That was interesting. And here we are in Georgetown. Very, very quaint, historic town, as I mentioned. Third oldest town in South Carolina, and that's really old. Basically talking 18th century or 1700s. So I want to give you a view of this lovely sunset here in Harbor Walk Marina. Having told that story of why we're here now, let's take a look at some sights. And we'll start off with the background shot of, well, let's just check it out here and see what we can see. There's the Scout, and there she is. You can barely see her over my right shoulder. There she is, the Vante Tag. Let's go take a closer look as we look into the sunset. This marina, some new condos there since the last time I was here. There's a beautiful hotel in there called the George. But so this is looking up into the bay here in Georgetown. But if I span around to the west, southwest, there she is again, southeast, you can just barely see Winya Bay over my left shoulder now, which I showed you before in the video as we opened it up. But I want to walk down here and give you a nice little view of the Vante Tay for some perspective of her size against a neighboring yacht that came in the day after we arrived. So, little light problems there, folks. You're in a shadow, but there she is. You can see her. That's better. That's us, and that's the story from beginning to present. 41 years of epic provenance of a little tiny sailboat called the Vante Tay. Vante Tay, Whiskey Tango Hotel, 3077, out.